Good afternoon. We are so excited to see everyone here for our second lecture in our second half lectures, Influential Women of the South Coast. I am really privileged to be here with Mary Howland Smoyer, who will be lecturing today. I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about a project that's going on now in New Bedford and sort of the impetus for this lecture series. A woman by the name of Christina Bascom, who is a local person from Marion, became really interested to know the story of New Bedford because she was fascinated with Petticoat Row, which was a group of shops in Nantucket that were operated by women and very successfully for quite a long time during the 18th and early 19th century. And Chrissy wondered if that type of society existed here in New Bedford when whalers were out to sea and women were here alone. How did they conduct business? What were their lives like? From this seed of an idea, Chrissy has come to the museum and said, this is something I'd really like to explore. And you may remember that maybe 2 years ago, I did a lecture for second half about the women, whaling wives, women who went to sea and women who stayed home. So of course, this sparked my interest too, because this was a curiosity and fascination of mine. We've now created a committee of 20 women. They represent women's organizations here in the city, historical organizations, people who are interested. And we have been really fortunate to identify a researcher by the name of Anne O'Leary. Anne is with us this afternoon. She is the Emily Bourne Fellow, and she is researching women who we think are significant to the story of New Bedford. But we didn't want to have the story just be sort of the people we know. We wanted to figure out who are the people we don't know. So we have now put out ads in the newspaper and on radio. We've sent letters to churches and community organizations asking for suggestions of women who should be included. We're hoping to have a group of women who are diverse from various centuries, involved in all sorts of different occupations and interests. Our only criteria is the woman who can no longer be living. So we've had a few women who have snuck onto the list, and when we met in the committee, someone had said, oh, by the way, we didn't think she'd be here, but she still is. You need to take her off the list. We're really excited about the project. The hope is that we will identify some group of women to create a walking trail here in New Bedford. Women who, again, would represent the story in a very diverse and interesting way. So once Anne completes a lot of research, we will pick maybe a dozen, maybe 15 women and create a walking trail. We're calling it a map and an app, because what we hope to do is have a map that will be available at all the different local organizations, the National Park, here at the Whaling Museum, up at the Roachstone and Duff, at the Nathan Pollock Johnson House, but also that you would be able to use your phone to be able to walk around and learn about these significant women here in New Bedford. We're also hoping to create, we are going to create, I shouldn't say we're hoping, we're going to do it, a website, and that work is actually getting underway now, so that people who are interested in hearing about women from New Bedford and their dynamic stories will be able to use the website as well. So the project's just getting underway. We expect to launch the walking trail next summer. You'll be hearing more about it over the year, I know, but we're really excited about it. If you know women who think should be included, please email either me or Anne O'Leary. Our email addresses are here in part of the bulletin, or come and see us after the show. Anyway, without further ado, I do want to just spend one more minute to say next week, May 4th, we're going to have two lecturers, both on staff here at the museum. Arthur Mata, curator of New Bedford and Old Dartmouth history, is going to talk about the elusive Miss Waite from New Bedford. And then Mike Dyer is going to talk a little bit, who's our senior maritime historian, is going to talk a little bit about Emily Bourne, A New and Lasting Trail of Light. So I hope you'll continue to join us. But without further ado, I'm going to turn over the mic to Mary Howland Smoyer, descendant of Rachel Howland, one of my favorites, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Boston Women's Heritage Trail, for which we really have gotten inspiration for the project we're doing here in New Bedford. We're so grateful to Mary because she has given us many good ideas on how to conduct this project. Mary.
Okay, good. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, thanks to Sarah for asking me to speak today, and thanks to all of you for coming. So, I'm not a professional historian. I'm a retired elementary school teacher and librarian who loves history, especially Boston women's history, and now New Bedford women's history. And I'm very excited to be part of the development of the New Bedford Women's History Trail, especially since, as Sarah said, and as you can tell, my family name is Howland, which is a commonly heard name in this area, and my paternal ancestors all lived here. My great-great-grandmother was Rachel Howland, a strong leading woman in New Bedford. Her son William and his wife Caroline, my great-grandparents, lived here in New Bedford, and their son Edward, my grandfather, was born here and lived here until his teens. And this photo, Llewellyn, is my grandfather's brother. And I had never seen this photo until last week. Peggy Medeiros, thank you very much, found it and said that it's in the archives here, right? Yeah, so it's really fun to see the 4 generations. So in the 1930s, my grandparents settled in Marion, where my siblings and I still live all summer. And so I feel very at home in New Bedford in many ways, but I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know much about the story of New Bedford's women, including my relatives, Caroline and Rachel. So I'm eager to learn. Before I get to the public art in Boston, I'm going to tell you about the Boston Women's Heritage Trail a little bit. It's a women's history project that I've been involved in for over 25 years. The trail was founded in 1989 as a part of the Boston Public Schools in response to a girl asking her teacher after a class history trip touring downtown Boston, but where are the women? Boston has the first and most famous walking trail in the country, the Freedom Trail, but there are no women on the Freedom Trail. Further, there are only 2 women on the Black Heritage Trail, listed as the wife of or the daughter of a man. And in 1989, there were no images of named women inside the Massachusetts State House. And if you've been there, you know there's a lot of images. So where were the women? After all, women are half or a little bit more than half the world. So we set out to find them. Now, our guidebook has 7 self-guided trails, which tell the stories of over 150 women. You can use this book to walk the trails or print up a trail from the website or use an app on your phone to guide you. The women on the cover here are, let me try this little pointer thing. Isabella Stewart Gardner, Louisa May Alcott, Myrna Vasquez, an actress who founded an important Puerto Rican festival in the South End, Rose Kennedy, Amelia Earhart, who lived outside Boston and actually worked in Boston before she became a famous pilot, and Edmonia Lewis, a sculptor. These are our 7 trails. The North End, downtown, Beacon Hill, Back Bay East, Back Bay West, South Cove, Chinatown, and the South End. And we've also made a lot of small trails around different schools in Boston. So the students look around the neighborhood of their school and see who their school is named after and the streets in the neighborhood and who live there and construct a little trail. So we have a lot of small trails that you can see on our website in Roxbury, Dorchester, West Roxbury, Charlestown, East Boston, etc. We are about 20 women, all volunteers. We have a wonderful time working together. We meet a few times a year, and in between we give talks and tours, classes, do research, sponsor events, share ideas, blaze new trails, and participate in projects. Our 2 newest trails are an East Boston Trail and a trail in Roxbury tracing the overlapping stories of the African American and Jewish women who lived there. Our big upcoming project is participating in the celebration of the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote in 2020. We already have the beginnings of a suffrage trail mapped out. Today, I'm going to tell you specifically about women in public art in Boston. I have a map that I'll be handing out at the end of the talk, which shows you exactly where the public art is located, so you can visit it when you come to Boston. When we started the trail project, we said there were 9 statues of ducks and only 2 of women. And we smiled and we winced. But now we've sort of redone that a little bit, because this statue, which honors the famous book by Robert McCluskey, Make Way for Ducklings, actually features Mrs. Mallard and her ducklings. And after all, Mrs. Mallard trained the ducks and fed them and watched over them and walked them across Starl Drive and down Charles Street to the public garden, while Mr. Mallard, as you may remember, was off on vacation. So we love Mrs. Mallard. As I talk about the women in public art, in Boston, think about New Bedford women you think should be honored in public art. And at the end of my talk, you can share some names of women that you would choose, and I'll show you a list of some women that Peggy talked about last week. The Massachusetts State House is the site of 2 of the 6 statues. Both these statues honor 17th century women. To the left of the State House, we see the statue of Anne Hutchinson. The artist is Cyrus Dowling, an American sculptor best known for his statue, Appeal to the Great Spirit, in front of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The Hutchinson statue was erected in 1922 and funded by the State Federation of Women's Clubs. Anne Hutchinson was born in England. She and her husband arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1634. 4 years later, she was tried, found guilty, excommunicated from the church, and banished from the colony by Governor Winthrop and the other leaders of the colony. Why? She had challenged the religious beliefs of the leaders. She had held prayer meetings in her home, which were attended by women and men. Women were not supposed to leave meetings, and if they did, they were definitely supposed to leave meetings only for women. In her sermon, she put women's souls on equal footing with men's souls. Hutchinson was a midwife who herself had 15 children in 23 years. She claimed authority of an inner light, which encouraged her to preach. When she was banished in 1638, she and her family left with 60 followers, going to Rhode Island and then New York, where she died in 1643. The Hutchinson River and Hutchinson River Parkway at the edge of Manhattan are named after her. She was a courageous woman who stood for the right to religious freedom. The second statue honors Mary Dyer. This statue, erected in 1959, is to the right of the State House. The artist is Sylvia Shaw Judson. Dyer, also born in England, was a friend of Anne Hutchinson's. She was at Hutchinson's trial, and she walked out with her in support when Hutchinson was excommunicated. Dyer was a Quaker in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is interesting to think about since we're in a Quaker city, at a time when the practice of Quaker religion was forbidden. She witnessed for religious freedom 3 times by coming into the colony. The first 2 times she was banished. The 3rd time she was hanged. A martyr for religious freedom, one of the most important freedoms in our country. Here is Mary Dyer up close. It is interesting that both women at the State House are 17th century witnesses for religious freedom, friends who were condemned for their beliefs, and both are honored there. Inside the State House, there is now a public art mural called Hear Us. It was installed in the State House in 1996. It was authorized because there were no images of real women in the State House. Only 2 generic images, one a Civil War nurse and one a mother against war. The 6 women were chosen because they had such an important influence on the laws of the Commonwealth during the time when women could not run for office and could not vote. I don't have time today to tell you in detail about the women, but they are Florence Luscombe, a peace and suffrage activist, Lucy Stone, an abolitionist and suffrage leader, who we will discuss later, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, a leader of the African American Women's Club movement and a suffragist, Dorothea Dix, an advocate for the mentally ill, Sarah Parker Ramond, an abolitionist speaker and activist, and Mary Kenny O'Sullivan, a labor and suffrage activist. I would encourage you to visit the Massachusetts State House, see the 2 statues of women, and go inside to see the mural, where they have a very nice brochure which tells you all about it. It has the women's words on it and a little bit of details about a little bit of a biography. The 3rd statue honors Harriet Tubman. It was installed in 1999 in the South End section of Boston on Columbus Avenue, near the Harriet Tubman House, a social service agency. The artist is Fern Cunningham, who has several statues throughout Boston, including 2 which form a gateway to Boston as you drive into the city on Blue Hill Avenue from Milton. Harriet Tubman is one of the best known, most famous women in our country. Known as the leader of the Underground Railroad, a woman who escaped from slavery herself and then went back south to bring her family and others to freedom. She was also a spy and nurse in the Civil War for the Union Army and an activist for the newly freed slaves after the Civil War. This is the back of the statue showing the route Tubman took to freedom from her home in Maryland through Delaware and Pennsylvania and New York to Canada. Here's, so you can see this is the front, and I don't have quite the full, well, I think in the next slide I have a full picture of it. And then this is on the back. Here are some teachers posed in front of the statue. You can see a little bit more of how big it is. It's a beautiful statue, and she's holding a Bible in her hand. Sometimes she holds a gun in her hand. The woman, Fern Cunningham, who did it, said she studied her a lot and felt that she really communicated and did her work through God, and so she should have a Bible in her hand. Now this next slide, I don't know how I did this, but pretty impressive. Look at this. I told Jocelyn, I don't know how that happened, and I don't know how to change it, but there we are. Okay. So the exciting news about Harriet Tubman is that the U.S. Treasury has announced she will be chosen to be on the front of the $20 bill in 2020. She will replace Andrew Jackson, who will be moved to the back. So Boston is excited to have a statue of Harriet Tubman, since this is going to be a special tribute to her. And she did come to Boston, especially after just before and after the Civil War, to raise money and talk about her experiences. And she actually spoke about her experiences at different suffrage rallies. She didn't really talk about getting the right to vote, but she supported women getting the right to vote. And she has a great National Historic Site in Auburn, New York, which is another place to visit. I'm always promoting all these places to drive all over the country when I'm done here. So I also wanted to mention that there are 5 suffrage activists who are going to be on the back of the $10 bill. So Harriet's going to be on the front, and Andrew on the back. And whoever's on the 10, maybe Jefferson, is going to be on the front, or maybe Hamilton. Hamilton will stay on the front, and the 5 suffrage activists, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, Lucretia Mott, and Alice Paul will be on the back in 2020. So we have 3 years to wait to get these bills in our hands. I hope they can't be changed. I don't know. So the 4th statue I want to talk about is the Boston Women's Memorial. It's on Commonwealth Avenue at Fairfield Street. It honors 3 women, Abigail Adams, Phillis Wheatley, and Lucy Stone. So, Abigail Adams, Lucy Stone, and Phillis Wheatley. I'm counting it as 3 statues, so that brings Boston to 6. Anne Hutchinson, Mary Dyer, Harriet Tubman, Abigail Adams, Phillis Wheatley, and Lucy Stone. And actually, that's a really strong number. By contrast, Manhattan has only 3 statues of women. Eleanor Roosevelt on Riverside Drive, Harriet Tubman again, she's in Harlem, and Gertrude Stein and Bryant Hart behind the New York Public Library on 5th Avenue. So we're excited that we have that many statues. Now, to find the Boston Women's Memorial, let's take a walk down Commonwealth Avenue. We'll start with George Washington up on his horse in the public garden, cross Arlington, and walk down the mall. Here are the next statues: John Glover, William Lloyd Garrison, and Samuel Eliot Morrison. Notice they are all men, and they're all high up on the pedestal. George is even on his horse, so high. In 1933, that would be a long time ago. In 1993, a group of women got together to ask for a statue of a woman on Commonwealth Avenue. Commonwealth Avenue is completely laid out, and there was only one spot left where a statue could be placed. Then Mayor Thomas Meanier said yes, gave us quite a bit of money, and we went to work. These are the faces of the Boston Women's Memorial women up close before the statues were cast. Phillis Wheatley, Abigail Adams, and Lucy Stone. And here they are in bronze: Abigail Adams, Phillis Wheatley, and Lucy Stone. I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about these three women. The statue was installed in 2003. It was a 10-year process, securing the spot, choosing the women, choosing the artist, raising the funds, and waiting for the sculptures to be made. I was a part of that committee, and it was really fun. We had a great time. We started out just thinking about Abigail Adams for complicated reasons I won't go into, and then we said we can't just have one woman. There's only one spot left on Commonwealth Avenue. We want three. And so we ended up with Abigail, Phillis, and Lucy. Here are Lucy Stone and Phillis Wheatley up close. Notice that the artist, Meredith Bergman, took the women off their pedestals and had them using the pedestals for their work. Women are very practical. They do not want to be way up high on a horse. They want to get down to work. They're short biographies, and some of the women's words are engraved on the pedestal. This is Adams. Notice that each woman has a pen in her hand. They each used their words to make a difference in letters, poetry, speeches, and journalism. So this is the feather pen for Abigail right here. And then there's Lucy's more modern pen, and there's Phyllis's. Can't really see it very well, but that's the feather right there, curves through her hand. Here's the Pepper Memorial in the snow. And this is the artist, Meredith Bergman. She works in Brooklyn. She lives in Brooklyn. So let's start with Adams and Wheatley. These two women lived in Boston at the same time, but under very different circumstances. The biography of Abigail Adams, which is on the pedestal, reads, born in Weymouth, Massachusetts, she was the wife of the 6th President of the United States and the mother of the wife of the 2nd President of the United States and the mother of the 6th. Her letters establish her as a perceptive social and political commentator and a strong voice for women's advancement. The biography of Phillis reads, born in West Africa and sold as a slave from the ship Phillis in colonial Boston, she was a literary prodigy whose 1773 volume, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, was the first book published by an African writer in America. Abigail Smith was born here in this house in 1744. Her father, William, was a minister. Her mother, Elizabeth Quincy, educated Adams at home. She had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and her house is a museum today. The Abigail Adams birthplace, very worthwhile place to visit. Wheatley was born somewhere in Africa. We don't know for sure, probably Senegal. She was kidnapped, taken to Boston on a slave ship, where she was sold at auction. We don't know anything about her family. And she did not remember anything, or if she did, she left no record. This is what Wheatley's ship would have looked like. It docked right in Boston at Beach Street, which is in the Chinatown section of Boston. The tiny, sickly 7-year-old African girl was renamed Phillis after the ship she came on, and Wheatley after the family who purchased her. She lived with her owners in the center of Boston near what is the Old State House today. This is the Old State House, the only building that's left of all these. Now it's all big buildings. She lived down in here. By contrast, when she was 21, Abigail Smith married John Adams. They settled into a house next door where John was born. Both houses, where he was born and where they lived when they were first married, and therefore where John Quincy Adams was born, are part of the Adams National Historical Park. Another great site to visit. The Adamses had 6 children, 4 of whom grew to adulthood. Abigail, Nabby, Smith Adams, John Quincy Adams, Charles Adams, and Thomas Boylston Adams. Susanna died, their 5th and 6th children. Susanna died at age 2, and their last child was stillborn. John Adams was away in Philadelphia for most of 10 years, involved in the Continental Congress and writing the Declaration of Independence, while Abigail Adams ran the farm, educated her children, and wrote letters. John and Abigail's letters are some of the most famous letters in our country. They are all at the Massachusetts Historical Society. John and Abigail were both very aware that they were part of history, and they saved everything. You can read them online, or you can go to the Massachusetts Historical Society and read them in person. So let's read 2 of her letters. The first one, she was in Boston on July 18, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was read for the first time in Boston. This image is from a New England Life Insurance Company calendar. Maybe some of you remember these New England Life Insurance Company calendars. We always had them in our house. And I think, I just made this up, I think the artist used Adams' words to draw the picture. These are her words. Last Thursday, oops, I don't know why it looks like that, but I'll read them. Last Thursday, I'll go back to the nice picture. Last Thursday, I went with the multitude into King Street to hear the proclamation for independence read and proclaimed. So she's writing to John Adams, who wasn't there then. He's back in Philadelphia still, working on things. When Colonel Crafts read from the balcony of the State House the proclamation, great attention was given to every word. As soon as he ended the cry from the balcony was "God save our American states," and then 3 cheers which rended the air. The bells rang, the privateers fired, the forts and batteries, the cannon were discharged, the platoons followed, and every face appeared joyful. After dinner, the king's arms were taken down from the State House and every vestige of him from every place in which it appeared, and burnt in King Street. Thus ends royal authority in this state, and all the people should say, Amen. Adams is such a beautiful writer, especially extraordinary at a time when most women were not literate, and she wasn't writing a novel and fixing it up on her computer before she sent it out. She was just writing longhand, and that's the way she wrote. Thus ends royal authority in the state, and all the people shall say, Amen. This is her most famous letter, which is also on her statue. She wrote to John, "By the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than our ancestors." Now, I'm not insulting any men in this audience. This is a little bit extreme, but it's interesting to think that she wrote this way back in 1776. "Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. All men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. So that could be written in the 20th century with a little bit more modern language. There she is, writing that in 1776. John answered her back a little bit sarcastically, and they didn't pay any attention. Imagine that she wrote this 200 years ago. She was very well versed in political issues of the day. She was a big advisor to John Adams, and she had very forward-looking ideas. John Adams, I'm not going to get this quite right, but I think the Adamses are the only president and his wife who did not own slaves for the first 12 presidents, I think. Anyway, it's a very long number. It might be the first 10, but they are the only, and they deliberately did not have slaves. They did not believe in slavery. Meanwhile, the Wheatley family had recognized that Phillis was a literary prodigy and allowed her to be educated. In 5 years, having come over on the ship with no family and a whole new life and language and everything, she learned English, Greek, and Latin, and she wrote poetry. She was very religious, joined Old South Meeting House. This is Old South Meeting House today. This is an old-fashioned picture of it. This is a maquette of Wheatley in an exhibit inside Old South, which is a museum today and another place for you to visit. As you all know, in 1773, a famous event took place in Boston, the Boston Tea Party. Well, that same year, another incredibly exciting event took place in American history. Phillis Wheatley, young, enslaved African woman, published a book of poetry, becoming the mother of African American literature and proving that the black African could think, learn, read, and write as well as the white European, a fact which was widely disputed at the time and is sometimes still disputed. Wheatley traveled back across the Atlantic Ocean in 1774, still enslaved but famous, to be honored in England, which is where her book was published, because no publisher could be found in the colonies. No one in the colonies could believe she had actually written the poetry. Scholars have written about what it must have been like for her to travel back across the Atlantic about 14 years after her arrival here in America. The first time enslaved, 7 years old, the second time still enslaved, but now famous and traveling in a regular luxury style. Here are a couple of quotes from Wheatley. "Poetry is the voice to which I speak to the world. I was taken from my parents at age 7, with my only memory being one of my mother pouring out water before the sun rose." And a poem, her poems are pretty hard to teach to second graders, pretty hard to read, but I, young in life, by seeming cruel fate, was snatched from Afric's fancied happy seat. What pains excruciating must molest, what sorrows labor in my parents' breast. Steeled was that soul, and by no misery moved, that from a father seized his babe beloved. Such my case, and can I then but pray others may never feel tyrannic sway. Wheatley only stayed a few weeks in England because her owner, Susanna, was sick. After her return, she was freed by her owners, but her owners died, leaving her no money. Nothing. She was left on her own. Here she was, an emancipated young black woman living in Boston, not easy to make a living. She struggled. She tried unsuccessfully to get a second book of poetry published. She did marry John Peters. They had 3 children, all of whom died in infancy or at birth, and she died in obscurity. We're not sure where she's buried, maybe in the Granary Burying Ground, where there's a large grave with many people in it who were members of Old South Meeting who died in poverty, and some of them were buried together. Adams, on the other hand, joined her husband in Washington after he was elected president in 1797. She was such a strong influence and so politically astute that she was called Mrs. President. They were the first president and first lady to live in the White House. she complained a lot about it. It wasn't quite finished. Adams is honored at the Adams National Historic Site. We know where she is buried, in the crypt, in a church in Quincy. And most people have heard her name. So here's a couple of pictures. People like to decorate the statues because they're so close by and they like to stand with them. So here she is with a sweater and flowers, Phillis. Here's Abigail with some 5th graders. And notice the little boy in the front is sort of standing like her. He's trying to have his arms like her. And people put a lot of hats on them. This woman obviously has just graduated from someplace. And then the little black hat on Phillis. And it's amazing that these two women have ended up together in the memorial. One, a well-educated, brilliant letter writer, wife and mother of presidents. And the other, also well-educated, brilliant poet, but an enslaved woman most of her life. Here are some Girl Scouts with Abigail, and she has on a Girl Scout sash with all the badges. Here is Phillis during the Women's March. She got a hat last month, and with some rollerbladers. It's really nice to have the statues be so accessible. It's a wonderful, and it's something to think about if we get some women art and public art in New Bedford, to make them so accessible and have kids really be able to interact with them and get to know them. So the third woman we chose for the Boston Women's Memorial is Lucy Stone. This is her biography. Born in Brookfield, she was one of the first Massachusetts women to graduate from college. She was an ardent abolitionist, a renowned orator, and the founder of the Women's Journal, the foremost women's suffrage publication of its era. Lucy Stone graduated from Oberlin College, the first college in the country to admit women. She became a speaker on the abolitionist circuit, traveling all over the country, speaking against slavery with a charismatic, she was a charismatic speaker with a silver bell voice, although she was quite small. And a lot of women did speak around the country on abolition, but what they found was that some of the men who were abolitionists and some of the women who were abolitionists did not like them speaking because people were upset that women were speaking in public, especially to mixed audiences, that of men and women. So some of these speakers began to realize that they needed to continue to be abolitionists, but they also needed to speak up for themselves and establish their rights. It was an interesting transition for a lot of these women from being abolitionist speakers to being also women's rights activists. The women's rights movement was really heating up. This is, in 1848 is the first convention for women's rights, and that's honored at Seneca Falls, a National Historic Site, another place for you to visit in upstate New York. And Stone became a leader of the suffrage movement. She was a leader of the Worcester Women's Rights Convention in 1850, and many, many other conventions throughout the years. Here's a couple of suffrage posters that I put in for fun. The woman's hour has struck, women's suffrage is coming. We give our work, our men, our lives. If need be, will you give us the vote? Stone married Henry Blackwell in a special ceremony where she and he pledged that she would retain her rights and keep her family name. She was the first American woman to officially keep her family name, Mrs. Lucy Stone. So, if you kept your family name when you got married, then you are Lucy Stoner. Congratulations. I am not a Lucy Stoner, but my husband tells me I should change my name back, and then I could be a Lucy Stoner. So that's a Lucy Stoner. And my mother always told me that when she was growing up, if you spoke up at all for something that was sort of a women's rights issue, people would say you're a Lucy Stoner. She was really, it was a household, her name was a household word. These are Lucy and Henry's marriage vows, and they show you what rights women didn't have. We protest especially against the laws which give to the husband the custody of the wife's person, the exclusive control and guardianship of their children, the sole ownership of her personal property and use of her real estate, unless previously settled upon her or placed in the hands of trustees, as in the case of minors, lunatics, and idiots. The absolute right to the product of her industry. So women, when they got married, they lost their rights. They belonged to their husband. They couldn't keep their property. If they worked, they couldn't keep their money. Also against laws which give to the widower so much larger and more permanent interest in the property of his deceased wife than they give to the widow in that of the deceased husband. Finally, against the whole system by which the legal existence of the wife is suspended during marriage, so that in most states she neither has a legal part in the choice of her residence, nor can she make a will, nor sue or be sued in her own name, nor inherit property. Almost all those rights were granted to women. In fact, I think just about all those rights were granted to women before Lucy died, except she didn't get the right to vote. When Stone married Blackwell, she married into a famous family. Elizabeth Blackwell, Henry's sister, was the first American woman to become a doctor. His sister Emily was also a doctor, and his sister-in-law, Antoinette, was the first American woman to be ordained a minister. So it was very intense around the family dinner table at the Blackwell-Stone house. Stone and Blackwell had one child, Alice Stone Blackwell, who carried on her mother's legacy after she died. In the 1850s, the family settled in Boston, in Dorchester, in a section known as Pope's Hill. Unfortunately, the house no longer stands. It burned down, but there is a marker on the stone pillars that says that Lucy lived here. In Boston, Lucy founded the newspaper, The Woman's Journal, the leading voice of the American suffrage movement. She was one of the most important leaders of the suffrage movement, and I'm really sorry she's not going to be on the back of the $10 bill. I don't know who chose those 5 women, but I wish that we'd been able to speak up for Lucy Stone. There's a little blip in the history that makes her less known, which is that there was a break in the suffrage movement at one point, and there were 2 suffrage organizations, the American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Suffrage Association. The American one was run by Lucy Stone, and the national one was run by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And they wrote the first and definitive history of the women's suffrage movement. And they were still mad at Lucy Stone. So they didn't give her the credit that she deserves. The breach came because some women supported the 15th Amendment, which gave African American men the right to vote. And some women did not. Some wanted the women to get the right to vote alongside the black man or before the black man. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony took a very strong stand against African American men getting the right to vote, the 15th Amendment. But Lucy and her group said, it's okay, we'll let them have the vote, and then we'll go on and get the vote ourselves. So anyway, I wish she was on the $10 bill. So Lucy Stone is buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery. The chapel is actually named after her. The only sad thing is that, well, so she was cremated. She was the first, she's in the first urn, so she was the first officially cremated person in New England or the United States or whatever. These things are always complicated too. But anyways, the #1 urn has Lucy Stone's ashes in it, and her husband's, and her daughter's. And I'm sorry to say that it's labeled Blackwell. So we'd like to have Stone on there too. And we keep talking about, we're going to try to do something about it, maybe this year. Besides the Boston Women's Memorial, there is a bust of Lucy Stone in Faneuil Hall, and there's one of her in the Boston Public Library. This one is a beautiful marble one in the big Bates Reading Room in the Boston Public Library by an American sculptor, Anne Whitney. And this one is in Faneuil Hall, which has only images of men except for Lucy. And She's in Faneuil Hall because in 1873, on the 100th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, she called a large meeting which filled Faneuil Hall and said, no taxation without representation. Here's Lucy with a group of students reading about her. And here's some more pictures of the Boston Women's Memorial. So now, what about New Bedford? When I titled my talk, Women in Public Art in Boston and Beyond, I planned to scour New Bedford for women's statues and put them in at the end of the talk, but there are no named women statues that I could find. Here's what I did find. A lot of whaling-oriented statues. The famous Whaleman by Bella Pratt, who's a male sculptor who also did the statues representing art and science in front of the Boston Public Library. The Whale Tail, the Lewis Temple statue. The Bronze Memorial of Whalemen and Fishermen by Anna Hyatt Huntington, which is actually now in storage. It's being cleaned and it's going to be put in front of the museum. Sarah? Okay, it's going to go back someplace. It's Neptune, and then there's a memorial to whalemen in Buttonwood Park. And there's a new small statue on the waterfront, Fisherman's Tribute Monument, which does have a nice woman in it, which is great, and a little girl and boy, so. And then there's some markers. There's a marker mentioning Polly Johnson and her husband Nathan on their house. And there's a marker in front of DeVal's school honoring Marianne Hayden. It says, Marianne Hayden, founder and director of the Donaghy Boys Club, second mother to many South End boys, placed here in 1963 by club members. In the library, there's a big marker in honor of Sylvia Ann Howland, who gave $200,000 a long time ago, $100,000 to aid in supplying the city with pure water, and $100,000 as a fund for the promotion of liberal education by the enlargement of the Free Public Library. So that's pretty cool. And in the art room in the library, there's some sort of not too great plaster casts. One of Sylvia Ann Howland and one of Louise May Alcott, whom the sculptor, New Bedford sculptor Walton Ricketson knew, because apparently Louise May Alcott had a summer cottage in Nonquit. Is that right, Peggy?
Yes, she was father to Daniel Ricketson, who was a friend of
Say that again?
Well, Daniel Ricketson was a close friend of Bronson Alcott.
Oh, okay.
And so Daniel took Walton and his sister Anna often to visit the Alcott family.
Okay.
And so they were very close friends. And Walton actually is a far better artist than most people realize.
There's a small statue of Cornelia Grinnell, which Peggy mentioned last week, in the museum here, and an even smaller one of the famous singer Jenny Lind. There's a portrait of Martha Simon by Albert Bierstead in the Millicent Library in Fairhaven. She was a Wampanoag, despite the title of the painting, Alaskan Narragansetts. And then we don't want to forget the working women. Here is a woman working at a precision grinding machine in an exhibit here at the museum. And then there's a new statue, Seagull Cinderella. No comment. That's for another day. So here are the names that Peggy talked about last week with some additions. Mary Roach, Eliza Roach, Cornelia Grinnell, Harriet Jacobs, Sarah Arnold, Rachel Howland, Eliza Bierstadt. Then there's Sylvia Ann Howland, Hattie Green, Emily Bourne. You're going to hear about next week, right? Yes. Sarah Delano, there's two of them. Elizabeth Tabor, Marion, Martha Simon, and the women factory workers. So I forgot to ask you, I was going to ask people to think about which women they think should be honored in public art. And I have my little video tribute, but I forgot to tell you to put it online. So is that too complicated? Can I? I've got my,
Is it part of your presentation?
no, it's on my computer. That's too complicated, right? I'd have to get on the internet.
Is it like a YouTube?
It's on our homepage.
I will do this. You can do a few questions,
Okay,
and I'll see if I can figure it out.
okay.
Does that work?
No. Okay. All right. You can get on the, if you can get on the internet, it's on, it's online.
Can you do it from up there?
What do you need?
To get on the internet. You'd have to do it from down here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I forgot about that, so
So,
it won't work.
Mary would love to take a few questions. And we'd love for your questions, if you don't mind using the mic, because we're recording this, and then we'll be able to hear the question you're asking. So here we go. Peggy.
One comment, the statue at Buttonwood Park is actually a memorial to New Bedford's textile workers.
To who?
To New Bedford's textile workers.
Oh, really? Huh.
And there are some women included.
Oh, good.
And I think we should not forget the Weston sisters, who spent a number of years in New Bedford as underground abolitionists. They came and they taught, and their school was originally on Mechanics Lane. Later they taught at New Bedford High School. And their older sister is someone who should be included in Boston, Maria Chapman Webster, who was one of the great early abolitionists in Boston. And they were responsible, for example, for Garrison coming to New Bedford.
Cool.
And Lucy Stone spoke here in New Bedford.
Oh, she did? Oh, good. That's cool. Do you know where she spoke?
She spoke at Liberty Hall.
She spoke at Liberty Hall.
Is it still standing?
No, unfortunately it's not, but I did find a notice in the Morning Mercury.
Jocelyn is miraculous. Look what she did.
Oh, we're there. Terrific.
Okay?
Let's see if it looks.
This is Jocelyn's first assignment. She started 4 days ago. Pretty
Oh, really?
impressive, huh? So happy to have her.
I would take another question.
Okay. We have another question for Mary?
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Go ahead and then we'll ask her.
Okay.
Not really a question, just a comment.
Yeah.
As a native Bostonian, I attended the Lucy Stone School for a
Oh.
while.
Excellent. Yeah. has the artist's husband with her. That's Mayor Menino. Barbara Lee on the right, she's the major benefactor.
This is awesome!
Lucy Stone. Lucy Stone. Abigail Adams.
Phillis Wheatley.
Phillis Wheatley.
And these are good because you can actually touch them. It's not like some of the statues are like really high up on the pedestal and only if you're a basketball player can you reach that far up. Remember the ladies, do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. This is awesome!
Lucy Stone.
She wrote a letter to John Adams. If what she sent to her husband wasn't right, it was right. But I mean, if it didn't work, then what was the point of it? She was more just saying, don't forget ladies because we exist too.